Sunshines, we are back with another session. In today's session, we're going to be talking about the flow of HTML, as you can see over here on the left. Um, so let's go ahead and get started. So a browser will render the elements of an HTML document that has no CSS from left to right, top to bottom, in the same order that they exist in the document. This is called the flow of elements in HTML. In addition to the properties that it provides to style HTML elements, CSS includes properties that change how a browser positions elements. These properties specify where an element is located on a page, if the element can share lines with other elements, and other related attributes. Excuse me. In this lesson, you will learn 5 properties for adjusting the position of HTML elements in the browser. Those are to include position, display, Z, index, float, and clear. Each of these properties will allow us to position and view elements on a web page. They can be used in conjunction with any other styling properties you may know. Okay, next. So position. Take a look at the block level elements in the image below. I'm assuming these are the block level elements. Block level elements like these boxes create a block. Box level elements like these boxes create a block the full width of their parent element. Oh, create a block the full width of their parent elements, and they prevent other elements from appearing in the same horizontal space. Notice the block level elements in the image above take up their own line of space and therefore don't overlap each other. In the browser to the right, over here, you can see block level elements also consistently appear in the left side of the browser. This is the default position for block level elements. The default position of an element can be changed by its settings, by setting its position properly. OMG. The default position of an element can be changed by setting its position property. The position property can take one of the 5 values: static, which is the default value, relative, absolute, fixed, and sticky. In the next few exercises, you'll learn about the values in the list above. For now, it's important to understand that if you favor the default position of an HTML element, you don't need to set its position property. Alrighty, so for our instructions, in the style.css file, add a declaration to the question rule set that sets the position to static. Notice that setting position to static does nothing. That's because static simply refers to the default behavior. So as we can see, static default. So we're already here in style.css. We're going to find that question class, scroll, scroll, scroll. Here it is. And then this, we're just going to put position here and static. So this isn't going to change anything in our browser because this is the default. So let's run that. Perfect. Moving along. One way to modify the default position of an element is by setting its position property to relative. This value always allows you to position an element relative to its default static position on the web page. Here's an example. Position, set that to relative. Although the code in the example above instructs the browser to expect a relative positioning of the green box element, it does not specify where the green box element should be positioned on the page. This is done by accompanying the position declaration with one or more of the following offset properties that will move the element away from its default static position. So top obviously moves it to the top, bottom moves it to the bottom, left to the left side, and right to the right side. You can specify values in pixels, ems, or percentages amongst among others, to dial in exactly how far you need the element to move. It's also important to note that the off it's also important to note that offset properties will not work if the element's position property is the default static. Okay, so it's also important to note that the offset properties will not work if the element's position property is the default static. Okay, got it. That's drilled in. In the example above, the element of the green box class will be moved down 50 pixels into the right. How will it be moved down if that's top? Okay, will be moved down 50 pixels into the right 120 pixels from its default static position. Oh, the image below displays the new position of the box. Okay, so what I'm gathering from this is we're adding 50 pixels of space to the top of the element. Okay, moves the element down from the top. Okay, see, I skipped over this. So the top moves the element down from the top. The bottom moves the element up from the bottom. Okay, that's just okay. That's gonna take, I'm gonna have to really drill that into my brain. The top moves it down from the top, the bottom moves it up from the bottom. So that means the left moves it away from the left side to the right, and the right moves it away from the right side to the left. So these are opposites. Got it. Offsetting the relative element will not affect the positioning of the other elements. So now in the style.css file, inside the question rule set, change the position property to relative. So we are already here. We're just going to scroll down to question. We're going to change that to relative. Ooh, 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 ooh. Here we go. Let's run that. Move on to the next one. So next in the style.css file, offset the question class 40 pixels from the top. Okay. So this is just going to look like top, 40 pixels from the top, 40 pixels. Yep. All right, let's run that. And then really quickly, so we're looking for questions class question. So I like participating in physical activities such as running, swimming, or biking. So every question class is going to be, it looks like the top one is the one that's moved 40 pixels from the top. So let me just scroll down here so we can all get a visual of what that actually looks like. All right. So question one, this is what I'm assuming we're looking at. Let's just run that. Okay, yeah. So I removed that element that we just added, that position at 40 pixels from the top, and it took away that space. So now we're just going to add that space back here. There we go. And watch what happens here when I add the space back. So it just added 40 pixels worth of space from the top. Next. All right, position absolute. Another way of modifying the position of an element is by setting its position to absolute. When the element's position is set to absolute, all other elements on the page will ignore the element and act like it is not present on the page. Okay, the element will be positioned relative to its closest ancestor that has its position property set to anything other than static. Because remember, these relative top, bottom, left, and right won't work if the position is set to static. Okay. Okay. Do 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 do. other than static, and offset properties can be used to adjust its final position from that reference point. Take a look at the image below. So top, this means it moved it 300 pixels from the top, and the right means it's just moved to the left, I guess. This website is in progress right here. Please come back later. Is this placed from a static position at the top left corner of its parent container, which is the main white area in the image. It is positioned using absolute positioning with offset properties to of top 300 pixels and right 0 pixels, moving it 300 pixels down and aligning it with the right edge of the parent, excuse me, and aligning it with the right page of the parent container. This absolute positioning causes other elements on the page to ignore it as if it's not part of the regular document flow. All right, so now in the CSS file, we're going to set the position inside the header rule set to absolute. Simple enough. Let's go ahead and find our header. Here we go. And now we're going to set the position. Header to absolute. Here we go. And now we're going to run that. Okay, next, when we change the position to absolute, you may have noticed that the header shrunk horizontally. So up here, that's definitely a clear difference. We'll learn why in a later exercise. For now, set the width property of the header to 100%. So header with 100%. Let's run that. And now it's back. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and move on. So now when the position is fixed. So when an element position is set to absolute, as in the last exercise, the element will scroll with the rest of the document when a user scrolls. We can affix an element to a specific position on the page, regardless of the user scrolling, by setting its position to fixed and accompanying it with the familiar offset properties, top, bottom, left, and right. In the example above, the title element will remain fixed to its position no matter where the user scrolls on the page, like the image below. Nice. This technique is often used for navigation bars on a website. Interesting. I feel like this is a great point to take notes. All right, so in the style.css file, change the position property inside of the header rule to fixed. So here, the header, right now it's absolute. We're going to change that to fixed. So, and then we're going to scroll up and down the page. Scroll, scroll, scroll. The questions are still there. Notice that part of the welcome section is now covered up by the header. That is because we changed the position of the header to fixed. Oh, that is because when we changed the position of the header to fixed, we removed it from the flow of the HTML document. Let's fix that. Set the position of the welcome element to relative. Let's scroll. Welcome. And for here, we're going to add our position. And then set that to relative. Let's run that. Oh, that looks good. And then when we scroll, our questions come back up. Nice. Offset the welcome section by 200 pixels from the top. Everything might not be displaying correctly just yet. We'll fix it in a later exercise. Alrighty. So here we're still in welcome section. We are going to Offset it 200 pixels from the top. Top 200 pixels. Where I see me going. Let's run that. Ugh. Okay, moving on. Now position sticky. Since static and relative position elements stay in the normal flow of the document, when a user scrolls the page or parent element, these elements will scroll too. And since fixed and absolute position elements are removed from the document flow, when a user scrolls, these elements will stay at their specified offset position. The sticky value is another position value that keeps an element in the document flow as the user scrolls, but sticks to a specified position as the page is scrolled further. This is done by using the sticky value along with the familiar offset properties as well as one new one. In the example above, the box dash bottom div will remain in its relative position and scroll as usual. When it reaches 240 pixels from the top, it will stick to that position until it reaches the bottom of its parent container, where it will unstick and rejoin the flow of the document. So here's an example. Will remain in its relative position and scroll as usual. When it reaches 240 pixels from the top, it will stick to that position until it reaches the bottom of its parent container, where it will unstick and rejoin with the flow document. Okay, inside the style.css file, change the position of the elements with the class question to sticky. So let's find question, scroll, 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 and we are changing the position here from relative to sticky. Let's run that. Oh, interesting. All right, let's move on. Next. Now with the Z index. When boxes on a web page have a combination of different positions, the boxes, and therefore their content, can overlap with each other, making the content difficult to read or consume. True. In the example above, the green box element overlaps on top of the blue box element. And how do we know that? By simply looking at this. We definitely have to run that to get a visual. All right, the Z-index property controls how far back or how far forward an element should appear on the web page when elements overlap. This can be thought of as the depth of elements, with deeper elements appearing behind shallower elements. The Z-index property accepts integer values. Depending on their values, the integers instruct the browser on the order in which elements should be layered on the web page. So here's our Z-index with the integer value of 1. So in the example above, we set the blue box position to relative and the index to 1. We change the position to relative. We change the position to relative because the Z index property does not work on static elements. The Z index of 1 moves the blue box element forward because the Z index value has not been explicitly specified for the green box element, which means it has a default Z index value of 0. Take a look at the example image below. Okay, so this looks like, I think what they're trying to depict here is that the blue box is in front of the green box. So in the style.css file, set the Z index of the header to 10. Okay, let's find the header. Scroll, scroll, scroll. Footer, wait. Oh, okay. It's at the top. Duh. We're going to set the Z index to 10. Let's run that. See what it does here in our browser. Okay. Nice. All right, inline display. Every HTML element has a default display value that dictates if it can share horizontal space with other elements. Some elements fill the entire browser from left to right, regardless of the size of their content. Other elements only take up as much horizontal space as their content requires and can be directly next to other elements. In this lesson, we'll cover three values for the display property: inline, block, and inline block. Excuse me. The default display for some elements, such as M, strong, and A, is called inline. So M, I'm pretty sure this italicizes this M, and then strong bold, and A is an anchor. Alrighty. Inline elements have a box that wraps tightly around their content, only taking up the amount of space necessary to display their content and not requiring a new line after each element. The height and width of these elements cannot be specified in the CSS document. For example, the text of an anchor tag, A, will by default be displayed on the same line as the surrounding text, and it will only be as wide as necessary to contain its content. Inline elements cannot be altered in size with the height or with CSS properties. Take note. In the example above, the M element is inline because it displays its content on the same line as the content surrounding it, including the anchor tag. This example will display to learn more about inline, so that M tag does indeed, right here, italicize. So to learn more about inline elements, read MDN documentation. Then we created a hyperlink using our anchor tag. The CSS display property provides the ability to make any element an inline element. This includes elements that are not inline by default, such as paragraphs, divs, and headings. The CSS in the example above will change the display of all H1 elements to inline. The browser will render H1 elements on the same line as their inline elements immediately before or after them, if there are any. All right, so for us, in the index.html file, add opening and closing strong tags around the word welcome. Notice that the element does not move. That is because strong elements are inline, so they can share lines with other elements. So basically all we're doing here, we're already in that HTML file. We're gonna find welcome. Here, all we're doing is we're just bolding welcome using these strong tags. So that one's one open, and we're going to close it here. Close it here, strong. And let's run that. See, just bolded our welcome here in the browser. Next. So some elements are not displayed in the same line as the content around them. These are called block level elements. These elements fill the entire width of the page by default, but their width property can also be set. Unless otherwise specified, they are the height necessary to accommodate their content. Elements that are block level by default include all levels of heading elements, H1 through H6, paragraph, division, and footer elements. For a complete list of block level elements, please visit the MDN documentation. Okay. All right. We can find this link here in the description to browse that further. But let's go ahead and continue on. In the example above, all strong elements will be displayed on their own line with no content directly on either side of them, even though their contents may not fill the width of most of the computer screens. Okay, so in the index.html file, add a footer element at the bottom of the document, right above the closing body tag. Let's go ahead, scroll down. We're gonna add a footer element here. Footer, opening, and we're gonna do footer close. Whoops, there we go. Let's run that. Nothing changed. That's because the footer element is empty. Now we're going to add an H3 element inside the footer that says, thanks for taking our survey. Okay. H3, we're going to open it. Let's go ahead and put our closer in. So we don't forget that. And it's just going to say thanks for taking survey. Ready to run that? We're going to scroll. Here it is. To improve the appearance of the web page, set the height of the footer to 100 pixels in the style.css file. So style.css, header, footer here. And we are going to set the height to 100 pixels. It kind of looks the same. Set the height of the footer. Okay. Excuse me. We did our job. Next. All right, so now we're going to talk about inline block. So the third value for the display property is inline block. Inline block displays combines features of both inline and block elements. Inline block elements can appear next to each other and can specify their dimensions using the width and height properties. Images are the best example of default inline block elements. For example, the divs below will be displayed on the same line and with the specified dimensions. I'm a rectangle, so am I. Me three. Let's take a look at the code. So here are all of our div elements, 1, 2, and 3. And then here is our CSS. So there are 3 rectangular divs that each contain a paragraph of text. The rectangle divs will appear in line, provided there's enough space from left to right, with a width of 200 pixels and a height of 300 pixels, even though the text inside of them may not require 200 pixels by 300 pixels of space. I see. So let's fix the display of the list elements in the menu at the top of the page. Set the display property of the list elements to inline block. So we're going to look for li, and then here, so we're editing display property. And then we're going to set that to inline block. And let's run that. Nice. So that just changed the way we view that question 1 through 6. Now we're going to set the width of the li elements to 80 pixels. So li. Now we're going to do our width to 80 pixels. Run that. Nice. Now we can reduce the top offset of the welcome section and set it to 50 pixels. So our welcome section, scroll. All right, here's our welcome section. And we are going to set it to 50 pixels from the top. 50. Let's run that. Better. Now we're going to set the display property of the answer elements to inline block. So answer, we're going to set display. Well, display is going to be inline block. Let's run that. Interesting. All right, let's move on. All right, now for a float. So far, we've learned how to specify the exact position of an element using offset properties. If you're simply interested in moving an element as far left or as far right as possible in the container, you can use a float property. The float property is commonly used for wrapping text around an image. Note, however, that moving elements left or right for layout purposes is better suited for tools like CSS Grid and Flexbox, which you'll learn about later on. Let's go. Okay. I'll add these to the description as well. So I can do a little bit more research on that. All right, now the float property. The float property is often set using one of the values below. Left, which moves or floats elements as far left as possible, and then right, which moves elements as far right as possible. So in the example above, we float the orange section element to the right. This works for static and relative position elements. Then we're going to see the result of the code below. So here, the orange section is just floated to the far right. Nice. So floated elements must have a width specified as in the example above. Otherwise, the element will assume the full width of its containing element, and changing the float value will not yield any visible results. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a declaration to the answer rule set that sets the float property to the left. So let's find answer. Welcome question answer. Then we are going to set the float property to the left, like Beyonce said. We're going to run that. Ooh, I am not a fan of this. Right, next. That looks really busy. Excuse me. Next. All right, now we're going to clear it, looks like. So the float property can also be used to float multiple elements at once. However, when multiple floated elements have different heights, it can affect their layout on the page. Specifically, elements can bump into each other and not allow other elements to properly move to the left or right. The clear property specifies how elements should behave when they bump into each other on a page. It can take on one of the following values. Left, so the left side of the element will not touch any other element within the same containing element. Right, so the right side of the element will not touch any other element within the same containing element. Both, so neither side of the element will touch any other element within the same containing element. And then lastly, none. The element can touch either side. So in the example above, all div tags on the page are floated to the left side, as we can see here. Float. And then the element with class special did not move all the way to the left because a taller div blocked its positioning. By setting its clear property to left, the special div tag will be moved all the way to the left side of the page. Take a look at the answer divs on the web page. They have been floated to the left, but the question divs are touching the answer divs on the right. Let's fix this. In the question selector, set the clear property to left. Notice how the questions move. Okay, we definitely need to do that. Let's find question, and we are going to put clear, and then set that to the left. Run it. It's much better. But honestly, these answers, they can be centered again. On the second thought, this layout is not looking so good. I agree. Remove the flow property from the answer selector. We'll say, okay, Codecademy agrees too. So we're just gonna remove the float property altogether. Run that. Much better. Alrighty. So now we're going to review. So great job, y'all. In this lesson, we learned how to control the positioning of elements on a web page. So what we've learned so far is that the position property allows you to specify the position of an element. When set to relative, an element's position is relative to its default position on the page. When set to absolute, an element's position is relative to its closest position parent element. It can be pinned to any part of the web page, but the element will still move with the rest of the document when the page is scrolled. When set to fixed, an element's position can be pinned to any part of the web page. The element will remain in view no matter what. When set to sticky, an element can stick to a defined offset position when the user scrolls its parent container. The z-index of an element specifies how far back or how far forward an element appears on the page when it overlaps other elements. The display property allows you to control how an element flows vertically and horizontally in a document. Inline elements take up as little space as possible, and they cannot have manually adjusted width or height. Block elements take up the width of their container manually and can have manually adjusted heights. Inline block elements can have set width and height, but they can also appear next to each other and do not take up their entire container width. The float property can move elements as far left or as far right as possible on the web page. And then lastly, you can clear an element's left or right side or both using the clear property. When combined with an understanding of the box model, positioning can create visually appealing web pages. So far, we focus on adding content in the form of text to a web page. In the next unit, we'll learn how to add and manipulate images to a web page. Yay! Alrighty. So that was a great lesson. I hope that you all took something from this. And until next time, sunshines, see you later.